Internet of Things, a free webinar offered by SOFTRAX, Aria Systems, and MGI Research. My name is Martin Sachs. I'm the Marketing Manager at SOFTRAX and moderator for today's presentation. As last week's Consumer Electronics Show proved, more businesses than ever are investing in the Internet of Things, and what's billed as an entirely new generation of connected products that will change the way companies and industries engage with their customers. Well, what actually is IoT? What is it that makes this technology so attractive to businesses of all trades and sizes? And most importantly, what does it take to successfully add IoT offerings to your products and services? Today's event aims to answer those questions, not just the why, but the how. And to that end, we've got three great speakers for you. Andrew Dailey, Managing Director at MGI Research, Brian James, the Senior Director of Product Marketing at Aria Systems, and Tom Zelli, VP of Sales and Marketing here at SOFTRAX. Before we get started, two quick housekeeping notes. Firstly, this event is being recorded, and recordings will be made available to attendees after the webinar has concluded. Secondly, we'll hopefully be able to take some questions from the audience at the end of the main presentation. To submit a question, you can either use the GoToWebinar Questions tab or just email it to me at info@softrax.com. That's SOFTRAX with an X. Today we're going to be covering three major areas. We'll begin with Andrew, who will give us an overview of the IoT, the threats and opportunities it presents, industry impact, and what companies need to make the move. Brian's going to be walking us through the billing and monetization aspects of this new technology. And then finally, Tom will look at revenue recognition and other accounting impacts your company can expect from IoT offerings. With that said, we're going to be going ahead and turning it over to Andrew Dailey, Managing Director at MGI Research. Andrew?
Thanks, Martin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good day. Just a few words about MGI Research. If you don't know us, MGI was formed in 2008 by former senior analysts from firms like Gartner, Soundview Technology Group, and Morgan Stanley. We're based in New York and San Francisco, and we provide research and advisory services to tech buyers, vendors, and investors. Our thematic focus is on tech trends that are both disruptive and durable. And this currently includes monetization, the Internet of Things, mobile, cloud and SaaS applications, and software-defined data centers. We're unique as a research firm in being able to bring to tech buyers, vendors, and investors really a unique combination of viewpoints that encompass the perspectives of industry analysts, operational backgrounds, and investment perspectives, kind of a hybrid of Gartner, McKinsey, and Wall Street. And we really focus on helping buyers make more informed decisions. We publish research, run conferences, and offer some strategic advisory services. So with that, let's take a look at kind of the first question, which is IoT real? And let's kind of begin with the definition, if you will, of IoT. So if you take a look at Wikipedia, they've got a very lengthy definition of the Internet of Things. It's the interconnection of uniquely identifiable embedded computing devices within the existing Internet infrastructure. And the definition goes on. It's pretty detailed. And as Martin mentioned at the opening, IoT is absolutely nearing the peak of its hype. And that frothy hype makes skeptical folks like us at MGI really question how real is this whole Internet of Things really is. You know, how real is it? And at last week's, the largest consumer electronics show ever in Las Vegas, IoT was the dominant theme. And you had Samsung's CEO talking about his company's, all-in push around IoT, and how in 2 years' time, 9 out of 10 of Samsung's products would be IoT devices. They didn't really specify what an IoT device is, apart from kind of highlighting a couple breakthrough products that were kind of more head-scratchers than anything else. An IoT-enabled hat that senses your brain waves, and another that's a device that can detect 20 unique smells. John Chambers, the legendary CEO of Cisco, and someone who clearly has a dog in this race, has been cheering IoT on and coming up with numbers that are larger than the GDP of most countries. The U.S. GDP is about $17 trillion, and Cisco's estimate of $14.4 trillion of opportunity at risk around IoT, if not eye-popping, is certainly audacious. When we strip away the hype, at MGI, we really see IoT as part of what we call the digital revolution. The economists and others refer to this as the third industrial revolution, which is really it's the arrival of nearly ubiquitous and free bandwidth coupled with extremely low-cost sensors and devices, and combined with the ability to store and analyze massive amounts of data very inexpensively. And this is enabling just a huge amount of innovation, and it's this innovation and how it's changing the nature of competition that I'll be speaking about. So when we talk about IoT and the digital revolution, it's really enabled by these digital technologies and things like cloud computing, and it's making it possible for companies to radically shrink time to market and reduce the amount of capital that's necessary to bring products and services to market. And this digital revolution is incredibly democratizing in the sense that small companies that previously couldn't afford powerful enterprise-class IT resources now have access to the same tools that previously were only available to much, much larger, much more well-capitalized companies. And similarly, large organizations can now tap into powerful agile tools that can provide incredible business agility. And so the result of this is that big companies, if they want to, can be just as nimble and agile as the small ones. And so this is an incredible benefit for companies of all sizes, large, medium, and small, and everyone is really focused on driving growth. So IoT and the digital revolution really offer tools to deliver these new and innovative services and bring them to market in a fraction of the time and cost that it once took. And by 2020, we believe the majority of Fortune 1000 companies will reduce their time to market by over 40%. And already today, we're seeing within manufacturing companies people that are reducing their design to delivery cycles by 50 to 60% through the use of cloud-based resources, 3D printing, and agile processes. So if we take a look at the next slide here, the result of that is what we're seeing is that shrinking time to market in and of itself is not new. What's new here is that the overall pace of change in business is accelerating, and it's beginning to create disproportionate results. And the time frames and the product life cycles of the past aren't simply out of step with the market, they're becoming obsolete. And entire market opportunities are coming and going in 5 years. Take a look at, as an example, Microsoft and the Zune. In 5 years, basically a 5-year period, Apple introduced the iPod, harvested 80% of the industry profits, and not only was Microsoft late to that market, it effectively did not participate in a $15 billion plus market opportunity. In 5 years' time, the company that was was called Research in Motion, BlackBerry, went from having dominant market share in North America in the smartphone category with nearly 50% market share. Its flagship product was synonymous with the market, remember the Crackberry, to today they've got less than 5% market share. And its revenues shrank from nearly $25 billion to today they're less than $7 billion. A company like Uber, which couldn't exist 8 years ago, the technologies were not mature enough. Today, Uber's valued more than John Deere, about the same as Kimberly-Clark, a company that was founded in 1872. And they have 4/5 of the value of FedEx, which is, potentially one of the companies that Uber will end up competing against. So that's the power of what we call the digital revolution, and the gaps that are beginning to show between the outliers that take advantage of these tools, that take advantage of IoT and the digital revolution, and the laggards. And what we're seeing is that the gaps between these high-velocity businesses and the laggards are actually increasing. And you've got the resulting, kind of impact on competitive market performance, and certainly an impact on individual company valuations. So if we take a look at the next slide here and talk about kind of how is IoT reshaping industries today, it's having an impact in specific industries already. And the impact of IoT is not just a consumer or B2C story that the press likes to talk about, but we really see it hitting all types of industries. If you look at GE's investment in what they call the industrial internet, it's already resulted in the fastest $0 to $1 billion revenue ramp in that company's storied history. And this year, GE expects to produce an incremental $5 billion of revenue growth due to their investments in the industrial internet. In utilities, there's a lot of hype around IoT and the smart grid. But on closer inspection, what you see is that sometimes much smaller efforts, relatively speaking, can also be just as innovative and often lead to kind of more revenue and competitive advantages. So for example, there's a utility that's actually incentivizing electric car owners to plug in their vehicles to the grid between 6 and 9 p.m. in the evenings. And in turn, the utility is using the car batteries as an incremental storage buffer, basically giving the utility the flexibility to draw extra power if needed at a time in the day when demand is uneven and can spike unpredictably. So that's not as sexy as a massive smart grid, but the end result can be just as financially meaningful. If you look in automotive today, over $14 billion in revenue are projected to be derived from the connected car this year in 2015. From a bottom line point of view, Morgan Stanley estimates that just the top 4 healthcare providers in the U.S., just 4 providers, could deliver an incremental $1 billion improvement to their bottom line just through IoT-enabled monitoring devices. Google Glass, which is another kind of Internet of Things thing, which the press portrays as a consumer product, really is beginning to gain traction with its industrial applications. There's a major bioinformatics company that's going to be shipping 3 pairs of glass with every DNA sequencer that it ships. So keep in mind that these sequencers are very expensive machines, and downtime is very costly. So by giving an ordinary lab tech, their customer, the ability to share a super high-res view of what's happening inside of one of these sequencers, the manufacturer no longer needs to fly an expensive technician on site to diagnose a breakdown. So while not every company, not every industry can point to concrete examples of new products and services that leverage IoT, we see that there's sufficient evidence to really determine that this is not, in fact, just a fleeting trend. And the opportunities to accelerate revenues or increase the bottom line by taking advantage of these enabling technologies are material, both in size and competitive impact. And maybe another way, if we look at kind of how does IoT and the digital revolution, how is it reshaping industry structures today, we think that Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter's kind of classic 5 forces of competition, that model is really a useful tool for thinking about the implications of IoT on your business. So one example is an industrial gas supplier which has built an IoT-like solution. So essentially they've outfitted over 100 industrial plants around the world with sensors that collect very large amounts of data about all of the equipment in each one of those plants. And then all that sensor data is monitored from a single location globally. So they then combine that with some advanced analytics and modeling analysis, and the company is basically able to optimize the operations of each facility. So by knowing when a plant is nearing capacity or approaching the boundary conditions that could create a breakdown or unplanned downtime, they're able to save millions of dollars every year and meet their customer service SLAs at a much higher percentage rate. So they avoid millions in contract penalties, and it really gives them the ability to differentiate their business relative to their competition. But in coming up with that, what they hadn't thought about was the ability to resell the data, to monetize the data, process knowledge, and the insights that they've collected. And so that thought around monetization really is opening kind of all new possibilities about their supplier relationships. So more data and insights gives them more power. By offering their monitoring capability as a service, whether it's individually or packaged with an overall offering, gives their sales force more tools to either solidify customer relationships or keep competitors at bay, or even both. And so, when you strip that back, you say at the heart of that, the key really is that monetization capability, the ability of that company to change its pricing, create new product and service bundles, and to have a lot more flexibility with their overall product offering. So we've cited a number of kind of positive examples of IoT-related innovations, but for each one of those, I could highlight just as well situations in which companies have been held back or completely blocked from delivering new capabilities into their market because of antiquated processes, expensive, inflexible systems. Certainly, we've seen plenty of organizations that have come up with new ideas, new products, but don't have the ability to monetize it. And so what you see is that companies that have built very strong defensive moats around their businesses over the past decades, the risks for those organizations are rising. And those risks are not necessarily from the existing known competitors, but from unknown new competitors, new market entrants. So we really think that it's time to really take a look at new processes and new tools to take advantage of these capabilities offered by IoT. And in fact, what you're seeing is that organizations really are rethinking their monetization strategies, their processes, and the tools that they're using. And if you think in terms of processes, IoT in particular really tends to increase the operational complexity around billing and the overall quote-to-cash process. And as you shift from selling relatively simple, discrete products to selling solutions that have greater complexity around pricing plans, usage and consumption-based pricing, a blending of physical goods and services, there's a big impact on revenue recognition. You have to manage billed but not recognizable revenue, usage-based rev rec, management of cost of goods sold. There's just a lot more complexity, and more complexity around things like fair value determination. So a good first step is where to focus, and in determining where to focus, undertake a benchmark. Where are you in terms of current processes and resources? We've come up with what we call the MMI, or Monetization Maturity Index, the way to measure relative strengths and weaknesses in your overall monetization capabilities. Organizationally, we see some progressive companies adopting what we call agile monetization teams. So instead of kind of the traditional linear waterfall approach to product R&D, product design, product delivery, and then at the very tail end of everything, there's billing and finance, we're seeing the more progressive organizations really infuse billing, finance, quote-to-cash considerations very early on in the product life cycle. So monetization really needs to be a key component very much up front and not an afterthought. So finally, we see that the demands of IoT and digital revolution are really calling for more modern tools. And the billing and monetization solutions that were developed in the 90s and are predominantly, but not exclusively, they were built in the era of on-premise software, they really can't deliver the agility that business requires today. And, you know, any ERP system that was architected and designed more than 5 years ago probably has systemic challenges when it comes to supporting IoT, recurring revenue billing, and rev rec. And while we don't advocate kind of a rip and replace type of approach, we do think that the taking an incremental type of approach to adding agile billing and monetization that complements the existing capabilities of the enterprise architecture really makes a lot of sense. And we're seeing that there's a whole new generation of what we identify as agile monetization solutions that can deliver much greater business flexibility, lower TCO, and offer your customers and partners really what they all want, what we all want, which is greater business transparency, greater flexibility, and greater business agility. So, you know, in quick summary, we're seeing IoT and the digital revolution is fundamentally shrinking the time cost envelope, and that's having a big implication on competitiveness of companies and the value of those companies. And at the core of this shift is monetization, the ability to take advantage of the new capabilities that are possible through these new tools. And the end result is that you really got to look at kind of new strategies, new processes, and new tools to help support modern monetization. And we see this market for these new tools. It's highly dynamic today, and that dynamism is only going to increase. So the importance of selecting the right partners is only going to increase as well. So that concludes my formal remarks. Let me hand the microphone over to Brian James of Aria Systems. Brian?
Thank you very much, Andrew. Good morning, good evening, good day to everyone. So I'm Brian James. I'm with Aria Systems, and I'm going to be covering the next stage of this presentation, which is really around some of the systems and how they've changed to support monetizing the IoT. And the way I'd like to start is I'd like to talk about the fact most people think about the Internet of Things as being about the things, the devices that connect to the Internet or are connected by the Internet. And I think the reason for this is the CES show. Everybody's kind of enthralled with all the new devices that come out. But it's not just about the devices. I'm going to explain why. I'm going to give you some examples here. I'm going to talk about the monetization models that Andrew was referring to that businesses need to think about as they get involved in the Internet of Things. There are a lot of companies already doing a lot of work here, and the ability to be agile and switch between these models to better capitalize on the opportunities that are presented, to better own their markets is very important. I'm also going to talk about the differences for recurring services because they fundamentally change the relationship with the customer. And for firms that are used to selling devices in a one-time sale, that switch to adding services has a profound impact on the culture of the organization and the systems they need to support that switch. And we call that kind of billing agility, which is how do you take all that into account to actually deliver value. So before I get started, a little background on who Aria is, or who we are. We started out as a cloud agile billing company, and we've evolved into what we now call a cloud-based monetization platform. And the reason we've evolved is we found that it was really helpful to help companies figure out how do we take their offer, their products and services, and monetize those or convert them into money. And we find ourselves augmenting existing systems. Andrew made the comment about ERP systems over 5 years old have systemic challenges. They tend to be very non-agile, and we believe that's true. We find that to be true with our customers. So we typically go in and complement or augment those systems to help them launch new products and iterate them really quickly. And I'm going to talk about some of the customers here and how they've used us to disrupt industries because it's relevant for this IoT conversation. So if we look at Philips, Philips was not the market leader in magnetic resource imaging machines. GE was the leader. So what Philips sought out to do was, how can we disrupt this market? How can we do a better job of making money here? So they took MRI machines, and instead of charging $5 million at a capital upfront purchase, they converted it into a pay-per-scan approach. So now hospitals can get an MRI machine and pay on a per-scan basis, which they are reimbursed for from their healthcare provider, which enables them to provide more services to their customers, which provides a better overall experience for the customers and a new market opportunity for Philips. Nokia here is similarly in the IoT. They sell mapping data, geolocation maps. So if you're on a smartphone and you want to pull up a location, they can sell the provider of that app maps of varying granularity. And based upon the granularity of those maps and what they're used for, they can charge a different price for those maps. So are they an IoT provider, or are they fueling the IoT revolution, if you want to call it that? It's hard to say, but they're definitely involved in it. And Red Hat provides a cloud platform to build and manage IoT services on. And there's some other things here. If we look at AAA, they pioneered a model called parent pay, child pay, where you can give a subscription to somebody else and pay for it. When we talk about some of the IoT services we're going to see, the ability to bill for those services is first and foremost important. But what about the ability to sell a company thousands of those services that they can then provide to their customers on a promotional basis or a sponsored basis, and then how do you handle the billing for that? So let's look at some examples. Some of the devices that people are commonly familiar with, the Nest device, control your thermostat. We're going to look at this in more detail, so I want to reference it. The smart systems in cars. If you're familiar with OnStar, they had a real problem with their OnStar service, which connects the car through the internet to GM support people. And now you can connect your smartphone to your GM car and have up to 15 people watching movies, surfing the internet, doing text messaging in your car. The problem was that connection, that OnStar service, was connected to the car. So when you sold your car, you sold your service relationship. That service relationship did not transfer with the person that owned the car. It transferred with the car. So all your payment information, billing information, usage information, you had to start over from scratch. This is one of the things that if you're getting into the Internet of Things, you would prefer to avoid these problems by planning up front. On the far right here, that interesting little collection of gadgets, it's called a microcontroller. And one of the things that's driving the Internet of Things is the dramatically lower cost of microcontrollers, which enable things like smart cars and autonomous cars and a bunch of the industrial internet that Andrew referred to around GE. The ability to control things remotely through an internet connection to a microcontroller. There are a bunch of other devices that are really popular as well. With the smartphone, if you look right in the middle, you'll recognize the iPhones, the Android devices. To the right of that is a device by AliveCore. It's a EKG heart monitor. So you snap this onto your iPhone, hold it over your chest, and it'll actually take an EKG of your heart, which you can then send to your doctor after it gives you a diagnosis of seek medical help immediately. You're fine. But what a great device to avoid calling 911 or an ambulance or anything else to provide better medical care. And this is a device that just wasn't possible 10 years ago. Now you can snap it on your iPhone. You can get one of these. I believe they're $79.99. And then there's a service plan that goes with it to transmit that information. So most people think about these devices, but really it's not just about these devices as we move to the next one. It's about the services that are associated with these devices. Because if I buy this EKG heart monitor for $79, if I use it for 10 years, aren't the value of those services a lot higher than the cost of that monitor? If I look at OnStar services in my Cadillac, the recurring fees I'm going to pay them year after year are far greater than the incremental cost of installing that device in the car. So when we think about monetizing the IoT, you want to think about monetizing the services associated with the device. Let's go to the next one, because here are some really interesting examples that most people don't think about. The dairy industry, the cattle industry, the farm industry. There's a company, ENGS, that allows you to track your cows. It's a device that straps on the foot of the cow, and it monitors where they are, how much they walk, their temperature. And this device seems kind of simple, right? It's connected by a long-range pedometer, 2,000-meter capability to monitor your cows. But if we go to the next slide, what's really interesting about this device is that they use it to detect cows that are in heat so that they can be inseminated to produce more cows. So it's not just about tracking where the cows are, it's tracking when are the cows ready to be mated. And the dairy industry is, I don't know if it's $1 trillion, but if you look at all of animals, horses, cows, cattle, you're looking at definitely $1 trillion industry that can be fundamentally improved with IoT technology. Let's look at the next example. The Nest thermostat, which I'm betting most of the people on this webinar have either seen one, looked at one, heard about one. Well, what's interesting about Nest is you buy a Nest thermostat, but you don't buy a service plan with Nest. You need to go somewhere else. You need to go to Ooma, which started out as a VoIP company. Get unlimited calling around the world. What they've done is they've connected their calling infrastructure with the Nest thermostat and the other Nest devices. So if you're expecting your son home or your daughter at 3 o'clock from school, it will actually call you to tell you when the front door was unlocked. And you can see if they made it home on time. And of course, the question is, why isn't Nest offering those services? Well, Nest introduced DropCam, which is a new subsidiary. And what DropCam does is it allows you to, through the security devices, the video cameras, to take footage, upload it to the site, DropCam, and then send alerts and text messages and view these from any type of device. And this is a recurring service plan. Requires the purchase of a Nest device and then a subscription and usage to DropCam based upon the number of cameras and volume of video footage that you're collecting. And you may ask, well, why isn't one company doing all of this? And I believe it comes down to the DNAs of the company and the systems that they have in place to manage either one-time sales or recurring revenues. Let's look at the next example. Nexia is a company that competes with Nest. It was started out of Ingersoll Rand, a traditional Fortune 100 company, been around for probably closer, if not over 100 years. Schlage locks, traditional key locks. They saw a new market opportunity. They jumped on it. They created a new subsidiary called Nexia that offers these recurring plans. So based upon the number of locks you manage, or the number of locks you purchase and install and want to manage, you pay more for the Nexia service on a monthly basis. Different model than Nest. It'll be interesting to see, who wins out in the end, but the lines of competition are clearly being drawn, and they impact the systems that you put in place to manage them. Let's look at the next one. Because what it comes down to when we talk about agile billing, it's about the services that are going to drive the growth for monetizing the Internet of Things. And you're going to need services to take all that intelligence that's built into those microcontrollers, that's built into those devices, and really turn those into a capability that customers will pay for and that companies can use for competitive advantage. What I find most interesting about this quote is that it's from Rajiv Kumar, who builds microcontrollers. So those are those little CPU chips that control physical devices like the industrial internet. And even someone who builds those microcontrollers is saying it's really about the services. You need to think about how the services are going to deliver value and how you're going to monetize those. So if we look at a very common device, the Fitbit. Today you buy a Fitbit. Various charges, say it's $100 US, 80 British pounds. The services are free on a Fitbit. But if we look out a year from now or 2 years from now, I will guarantee you, you're going to start paying for those services because they're going to create new ways to tie the information from your Fitbit in with geolocated tracking information from your smartphone to tell you how fast you ran, where you ran, and give you recommendations to improve your overall fitness. And that's going to be a charged service. And the question is going to be, does Fitbit have the systems in place to make that transition, or is someone else going to take that market from them? Let's look at the next one. Because when we talk about these services, we're talking about how do you monetize for it. The one people are most commonly aware of are subscriptions, a monthly fee, a quarterly fee. In addition to subscriptions, though, you want to have one-time additions, the charge for the Fitbit device, an activation or cancellation fee. And where we really see things are going are around usage and consumption-based models. So based upon how much usage I have, like your wireless telephone plans, do you have 500 minutes or 1,000 minutes, I'm going to pay based upon the volume or quantity of services I consume. And what's important here is how do you engage your customers around that usage? Because there are a lot of systems out there that say they can handle usage, and you load in usage once per month, once per billing period, which means that you can't engage your customer around usage at all. You're just performing what I call a systemically challenged, archaic model of billing. There's no way to engage the customer that says, you're approaching your usage limit for this billing period. Why don't you upgrade to a higher usage plan? It's good for the customer. It's good for your business. But there are a lot of billing systems out there that can't support that. And on top of this, you have the business models and how you choose to offer these types of services, what we call business policies. How do you handle changes? A great model that's come out recently is when you get on a recurring plan, rather than raise the price 5% a year, you offer a declining discount. So I sign up with a 20% discount. Next year I get a 15% discount. The year after that I get a 10% discount. Much more attractive model to the consumers because they feel like, hey, I'm getting a discount. It's not a price increase. I'm getting a discount every year. Small change, big impact on your back-end billing systems. And the likelihood is if you don't have an agile billing system, you won't be able to handle this. So it's things to think about before you go out and start launching your product. Let's look at the next one. Because when we talk about these recurring services, it fundamentally changes those customer dynamics. From a one-and-done sale, you now have a relationship, a perpetual relationship for life. If I buy an OnStar, if I buy a GM car with OnStar, the possibility is I could have a relationship with OnStar until I leave this earth. Because I could buy any number of different GM cars, but I could have a relationship with OnStar for that entire time. So how you retain me as a customer and upsell me new services are incredibly important to being profitable. And iterating pricing and packaging is how you create competitive advantage. When you look at the telcos, the AT&Ts, they've got three fundamental products, voice, data, and text. And yet they're continually iterating the packaging and the pricing for those services. And to monetize the Internet of Things, you want to think about how you can rapidly iterate your offerings. Let's go to the next one. Because this is what a lot of companies think is my existing billing system will work for this, won't it? I've got an ERP system. I can supplement that with manual processes. And the reality is, maybe to get started, yes. But what you really need is an agile billing system that can support rapid launches of new products and iterations on those products that can support subscription and usage models, because you may launch with something simple, a simple subscription. But as you start to segment your customers, high usage customers, low usage customers, you're going to want to offer them different plans, different usage models. And you want your billing system to be able to support that. And you want to be able to do this without ripping and replacing anything. So you want a system that can augment easily with minimal IT involvement to make any of these changes. And that means you want to look at more than just preparing an invoice or handling a credit card transaction, but actually managing the products, the customers that buy them, the collections from those customers, and how you do all the reporting on this. Let's sum this up before I turn it back over to Tom. Don't think about, focus on the services as much, if not more, than the devices. And evaluate your back-end systems to make sure that you can support rapid launching new offers and iterating without putting an undue burden on your IT staff. I know they're the best in the world, but when you ask them to do the unhuman things, backlogs result and things get slowed down. And a product that's launched late, even 6 months, can cost you 35% of the total profits. And the other thing you want to make sure you can do is handle what we call multiple element arrangements, which is what Tom's going to be talking to you about. Because if I'm selling a device and a service, how do I handle the different revenue recognition for these services versus the device? They're recognized at different points in time. That requires complexity that you may not be able to support with the systems you have. So with that, let me turn it over to Tom.
Okay, thank you, Brian, and thank you all for attending our webinar today. I thought I'd spend just a minute here giving you a background on SOFTRAX, and then we're going to jump into some examples in the revenue recognition space. So SOFTRAX is based in Boston. For the past 15 years, we've been focused on providing software to automate complex revenue management. We started in the software vertical with some of the complexities around 97.2, et cetera. At this point, we've just recently completed our 600th successful deployment of our software. We're currently deploying our 4th generation of our revenue recognition technology. One of the things that I would say of importance is that though things have varied through the years, I think it's safe to say that some of the biggest challenges we've seen are occurring today around, recurring revenue in general, certainly in the Internet of Things, and I'll get into that a bit today. And then also the changes we're expecting from the impact of the new guidance, ASC 606 and IFRS 15, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So that's a bit on SOFTRAX. On the next slide, I'd like to first describe some of the specific complexities we're seeing in recurring revenue scenarios in general, and then the additional complexity we see specific to the Internet of Things. And then after that, in subsequent slides, I want to talk a little bit about the system-level impact and some of the things you should consider as you're assessing how to change your systems. So let's start with recurring revenue. Brian described very well some of the challenges that exist from a billing and a monetization perspective with recurring revenue models. The interesting thing is that these models have a kind of a knock-on effect that impact RevRec. And there's a number of complexities, but 2 in particular I'll talk about today. One regarding the ability to manage unbilled revenue as well as billed revenue and why that occurs. And then 2, the need to efficiently handle what we call post-processing, or effectively, changes or adjustments that need to occur to existing contracts and revenue schedules once they're set up. So let's start with the unbilled case and just look at talk through a simple example. As Brian described, a company might offer a service on a recurring model. He talked about usage-based pricing. So the intent there is that the company wants to value price the offering. And in this example, let's just say they bill based on a metric of the value consumed in the period. Maybe it's the bill changes based on the number of unique user IDs that access the service in a particular month. So in the straightforward case, if the company were just billing monthly, they would have to bill in arrears, obviously, because what they need to do is they need to, collect the metric, in this case the number of user IDs, calculate the bill, present it to the client, and at that point they can recognize the revenue for the past month. So, very straightforward so far. Where we see complexity, though, is when, in order to reduce processing overhead, they choose to bill quarterly, maybe semi-annually, even annually. It's, sometimes a better, more efficient model both for themselves and for their clients. Now, in that scenario, things get a little bit more complicated because they're still forced to bill in arrears in the sense that they have to collect that value metric. However, there's an interesting aspect to the guidance. So in reality, the schedule for revenue recognition and the schedule for billing, though often tied together in today's ERP systems, really can and really should be maintained completely independently. So there's really not necessarily a need for the company to wait to start the recognition of revenue based on the presentation of the bill. They can deliver it, truly they can recognize the revenue as they can measure value delivered to the client. Now, the key in this scenario is that they have to have the ability to recognize the unbilled revenue and ideally track that revenue independent of the billed revenue. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about the impact of that, but for now, let's just continue on with this example. So let's assume this is a service of the type that the client may need to halt or perhaps temporarily pause the subscription to the service. This is a very simple case, but with the subscription economy and with IoT come all kinds of changes that could take place. So, for example, there could be changes to the contract midstream. There could be discounts, promotions. There could be certain grace periods, extensions, other offers that cause the revenue either to stop or to change its form. Now, the important factor here is that you find yourself in a position of needing to alter an already defined revenue recognition schedule. I bring this example out specifically because though this is a common model in recurring revenue and a very common model in the Internet of Things, it's extremely hard to find support for this type of model in existing systems. Moreover, it's something that we see often get overlooked. So as companies are evaluating the systemic impact of moving to these new business models, they're focused on, okay, how do I set these schedules up primarily, and less so on, okay, what happens if I need to make a change to a schedule? Can I actually automate that in my processing? So, again, later in the deck, we'll talk about some of the systemic impacts of that. Now, referring to the bottom half of the slide, when we talk about the Internet of Things, we view this almost as a special case of recurring billing that adds yet another layer of complexity to the revenue recognition. Here, you move into a situation of software meeting hardware, and you move into the realm, as Andrew described earlier, of multi-element arrangements, the need to perform allocation, and probably the need to determine fair value. So, a lot of those concepts are new for companies that provide just a typical device. Now bringing software into the picture, they have to adopt new processes. They also have to, in some way, modify their systems to support these processes. As an example of this, and consider perhaps maybe almost a worst-case scenario, but a very common one in the Internet of Things, you may have to go as far as doing a multi-step allocation. So what does this mean? Well, essentially what's happening is you're now bundling the hardware that you traditionally sold with both essential and non-essential software. So essential meaning, perhaps the firmware that's bundled with the hardware. The non-essential meaning the additional services that maybe there's a subscription to. Now, in this case, allocation can get extremely complex because you may have to allocate in phases, so allocate across the essential elements, the non-essential elements, and then across the bundle as a whole. And again, here we're talking about a level of sophistication. It's just very hard to find this in an existing ERP system. And what you see as an end result is people are pushing their most complex revenue calculations off to spreadsheets, and it can get quite onerous. Another thing with the Internet of Things, and particularly if software is in the picture, now because you're now deferring some or all of the revenue of the offering, you now might be entitled to defer the cost of the goods sold as well. And this is great from a financial standpoint, but again, it adds additional complexity for the back office. Now, finally, you may find situations where it's difficult to determine fair value. We see this particularly in the Internet of Things. It's usually based when pricing is varying wildly. There are things that you can do, but again, it's a question of can you do them in an automated manner? Are they supported by the system? An example of that would be to determine fair value really based on a calculation of margin. So it would be a cost plus margin fair value. It's a situation that can be automated. It can be a good resolution to this case of struggling to provide a static fair value. But again, something to be considered when looking for systems to support your IoT strategy. So those were just a few examples, but let's move to the next slide now, and let's talk about the systemic impact of those examples as pertains to your ERP system or other processing. So here are some things to consider. First, a big one is that most ERP systems available in the market today trigger the recognition of revenue from the generation of the invoice. Now, by its nature, this clearly doesn't support the recognition of unbilled revenue, and there's some additive effects here. What you really want to try to do is find a system or modify the system such that you can maintain a complete separation of, what people call the order to cash, or the billing process, or the order to revenue recognition process. What's important here is that the order detail, the value measurements, all the things that are required to compute the revenue to be recognized are available to the revenue recognition engine ahead of the generation of the invoice. So it's something to look for when you're considering your systems, if you have access to this data prior to generation of invoice. Another thing to keep in mind, an additional complexity in this scenario to be aware of, is that this can get pretty complex, because what you're effectively doing is you're doing now a good job of accelerating your revenue recognition by recognizing it before the billing. The trick is eventually these bills are going to come in. So another systemic aspect you have to consider is the ability to match a bill coming in with the unbilled revenue that's already been recognized. Some level of sort of invoice matching capability. As an additional layer here, or another side note, if you're in a multi-currency environment, things unfortunately get a little bit more complicated. The problem with multi-currency, you can still recognize the revenue ahead of billing. The regulations and the guidance say that you have to adjust the revenue recognition based actually on the exchange rate that's in effect at the time you bill. So in this scenario, you can imagine you're recognizing revenue, you're applying the exchange rate, recognizing the revenue. You get up to the point of billing, you effectively need to adjust the revenue you've recognized based on the exchange rate at that particular instance that you deliver the bill. So just something else to be aware of. Regarding the second case, where we talked about subscriptions that can change over time, it's important you maintain an ability to capture those changes systematically. So that's in itself a fairly difficult thing. From a revenue recognition perspective, you have to maintain an ability to automatically recalculate your deferred revenue schedules. It can involve inline recalculations, it can involve catch-ups, true-ups, etc. on existing schedules. So not only do you have to be able to systematically take the change in, you need to be able to match it to an existing schedule, and you need the functionality to be able to adjust that schedule. Obviously, if you're in a high-volume situation, which by its nature IoT often involves, there can be some heavy processing requirements here, and you need to find a way effectively to do all of this in a very automated manner. Again, as I said before, these types of changes and adjustments are something that we see that are very often overlooked in the evaluation of systems. It's almost like a second thought, and yet are very prevalent in the IoT world. Now, in IoT, another factor to consider is, as I said before, the cost of goods sold. So here, you have to enable not only a systemic feed of cost data into the system, but also an ability to match that cost with revenue. So, here you have to handle not only all of the above, but the additional advanced requirements we spoke of earlier regarding things like, okay, deferring the cost in line with the revenue, matching the cost and the revenue such that you can compute margins, determining fair value as a function of margin, perhaps, in situations where it's very difficult to determine a static fair value for the different elements that you sell. So it's not just the feed, but the underlying processing capabilities that need to be in place to properly automate the RevRec. And then finally, there's been layered on top of this, of course, quite an impending change in the revenue recognition regulations themselves, the ASC 606 and IFRS 15. Our view on this, for some industries, there will be, a relatively minimal impact from ASC 606. However, others are going to have a very substantial impact. I think for vendors such as ourselves, anybody that's evolved their technology to support the software world in particular, the impact will be less, because I think the other industries, things like identifying performance obligations, very similar activities, at least from a technology perspective, are done in the software space currently. Allocating revenue across those obligations, again, it's being done, and it's been there's quite a bit of flexibility in terms of how that's done in the software world. Same thing in terms of the recognition of revenue, that they need to defer revenue based on the satisfaction of the performance obligations. However, other industries, telecom, cable, and many others, these are new concepts to them. And so as you're looking at your systems, you'll have to assess, do I need a major change here? Is there a major functional requirement that my system does not currently support? Now, on top of that, and I would say for all of us in the market, in the vendor community, there are requirements that we do have to add. I would say those requirements, some of the big ones center around dual reporting, so making sure that you can report revenue across two sets of books, because that is going to be required by the guidance. I would say we're all looking at the additional scrutiny that's being placed on disclosures, so the new guidance is more principle-based. And I would say also there's some elements of variable consideration that are going to impact these, that are going to impact our collective technologies. So let's move on now and talk about some options here. That was sort of the complexity. So what can you do? I mean, all of the major options are still on the table. Certainly spreadsheets are one of the most common ones. I would say the nice thing about spreadsheets, I mean, they're flexible, they're seemingly cheap, everybody knows how to use them. However, our opinion, and hopefully some of what you've heard today, the complexity in IoT is just too great, and the risk of using spreadsheets, the lack of security, controls, audit history, it's just too risky for most businesses. Another option, and this one is very prevalent, is to customize. I mean, certainly the likes of Oracle, SAP, I mean, they have teams of people that will come in and write volumes of code to customize their solution to meet your particular need. The drawback, and I think this is going to be prevalent with IoT, is that you end up with not only a vendor but a version lock-in that makes the solution pretty brittle, and usually you end up in a situation where you have to pay an ongoing TIV to the vendor just to keep your solution moving in the direction of your business. A third option that Brian mentioned, and I think Andrew alluded to, is a complete rip and replace. There's two problems with it. I mean, one, rip and replace is always a disruptive and costly strategy. Two, we're just not seeing a single vendor on the market producing an ERP system that's capable of keeping up with the explosion and complexity that's occurring both in terms of the monetization around IoT and also in terms of some of the knock-on effects in terms of revenue recognition, et cetera. And so this leaves us effectively with a fourth option. It's an option we've termed DRP augmentation. So in the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about that to wrap up our session. So what you're hearing about today is effectively a collaboration between Aria and SOFTRAX. You're seeing an awareness from both companies that complexity is exploding in each of our spaces. The idea with this partnership is for each of us to focus on our respective areas to provide a solution to the market that offers sort of best-in-class technology for Aria in terms of the billing and the monetization, for SOFTRAX in terms of our sort of home and space for 15 years regarding the revenue recognition. So the intent here is to allow you to augment your existing system, preserve your investment, bring in best-in-class solutions that are designed to work and talk to each other, ideally to create a platform that you can maintain as a productized, auditable system that will support not only the requirements of today, but the requirements of tomorrow as you evolve your business. If you have questions on either side of that equation, certainly get back in touch with Martin or either of us to learn more. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Martin to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Tom. Unfortunately, we're almost at the top of the hour, so we are going to have to skip over the Q&A session. But I would like to thank very much today's speakers, Andrew Dailey, Managing Director over at MGI Research, Brian James, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Aria, and Tom Zolli, VP of Sales and Marketing here at SOFTRAX, for their wonderful insights into this fast-growing and very exciting field of technology. We hope you'll keep us in mind for future events. We'll certainly be advertising those on our respective websites as well as through mail-outs. And we hope that you found today's session informative and helpful. And if you have any questions about how we can help your company approach IoT, whether it's in the form of new products or simply increasing the efficiency of your existing processes, our contact information is right there on the screen. As mentioned, the session has been recorded. You should be receiving a follow-up email, whether you attended today's session or just registered, letting you know how to get to the replay. Definitely feel free to share it among your colleagues. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. Have a wonderful day.